Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. Today's guest is Chris Shelton, who is an ex-Scientology member and a studier of cults, or destructive cults specifically. He gives you a more thorough introduction to his work after my introduction. So I'll just say that we cover the ways in which cult-like behavior or cult-like systems of group thinking shape the ways individuals surrender their agency to the group. We also compare that to what's happening now in our culture writ large, and we, workshop different ways to resist becoming a part of a group that has abusive tendencies to it, how to recognize those tendencies and set yourself apart from what is sweeping a lot of people up concurrently and perennially. This is just different ways in which the human being is gamed by other human beings and by ideologies writ large. This is a very wide-ranging, very informative conversation, so let's get right to it. Here's Chris Shelton.
Hi, good to meet you.
Great to meet you too, Chris.
I just finished watching the first 4 videos in your Evergreen series. Holy shit, man.
How do you feel?
Fuck.
Let's talk about your emotions.
Oh my God. Right? I could download for a while. Let me tell you a little bit about myself.
Please do.
Introduce one another here. Okay,
yeah.
I'm 50 years old. I was born and raised in California.
What part?
Southern California, mostly, and Central. I grew up in Pasadena, California. My dad was in the Navy. My mom was a nurse. They got involved with the Church of Scientology when I was 2 years old. So and they stayed Scientologists my entire childhood until I left home. So my entire childhood was Scientology. So that was my religious background, and it was a cult. And I didn't know, they didn't know, we weren't, the Scientology is a complex thing. I can't really, simply explain it except to say that they were at the public level and they worked for the organization at a low level organization, like a public facing sort of place in Pasadena, through the 70s into the early 80s. And then they left the church, working for the church in like 1981 or 2 or something. I was just a little kid growing up, going to public school, doing my thing. And then at a high school, we moved up to near Santa Barbara to a place called Santa Maria. And the closest church then was in Santa Barbara. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I started doing, between sophomore and junior year, I started doing classes at the church myself. So now it became not just a thing my parents did or a belief that we had, but now I was taking part in it. And I was all in. And when I finished high school, when I was 17, I started working for the church in Santa Barbara. And that was a contracted staff position. It's a volunteer status legally, so you don't have to get paid anything. You are a religious volunteer. They've got things. It's a very, very crafted, very structured cult. Very, very structured. Okay, so then when I worked for the church in Santa Barbara for 8 years. And then when I was 25 years old, I went out of the frying pan into the fire by joining the Sea organization, which is the highest level. Okay, and that's SEA organization. It's a paramilitary, paranaval outfit. Ranks, ratings, yes sir, no sir, how high sir, dorm living, they feed you, they clothe you. I worked at the big blue buildings you might have seen in Los Angeles. Whenever you see that big building, this sort of U-shaped building with Scientology sign on it, that's where I lived. That building is where we all sleep. That's where all the dorms and the rooms are. And I did that for another 17 years. So I was full-time, flat out, doing nothing but Scientology for 17 years. And I'd already been working full-time in Santa Barbara. I had a full-time job outside the church to pay my bills. And then I was working 40 hours at the church. Volunteer, pretty much. I mean, the most I got paid, you get paid every week. And as a church staff member, volunteer, the highest I ever made in 1 week, I think, was about $200. Mostly it was $5, $10, $20, like if anything at all. That was the pay. So it wasn't about having a job. It was about saving the world.
Yeah.
And joining the Sea Org, you get $50 a week. But your food's paid for, they feed you, they clothe you, you don't have to, you got communal showers, communal bathrooms, you're working on the base all the time. So all your physical needs are kind of taken care of not in a great way. The eggs are runny, the food sucks, but you're living the dream of saving the world. And I did that for 17 years. And then I finally, through a series of events, it was about a 10-year process for me to wake up, right? A series of events happened while I was in the Sea Organization. I worked, the Sea Org is the upper level. So you have the public, the staff members, like the Santa Barbara staff, the city level churches, and then you have the Sea Org, which manages all of it, runs all of it, delivers all the confidential stuff, the Xenu story, all that stuff you might have heard about. All that is Sea Org level stuff that we delivered, right? So it was a pretty intense life I had, 25 years working for the Church of Scientology. And I got out at the end of 2012. I left the Sea Organization officially. I went through the channels, and then I got on the internet. And one thing about the Sea Organization, about Scientology, is that their methods of control are very effective. And I can model it for you. We can break all that down. But I'll just say right now that the self-policing mechanisms that there are installed are very effective. You don't look on the internet. You don't go looking for anti-Scientology information. You've been very carefully indoctrinated not to. And you definitely know the power of indoctrination, so you know how powerful that can be. Versus education. I use the word very advisedly. Indoctrination versus education. So I got out in 2013, went down the internet rabbit hole, found out all the things I had not known, not learned about, that L. Ron Hubbard's life was a total lie. They have this complete biography of him within the church that is not connected with reality in hardly any way. I found out he was a bigamist. I found out he failed college. I found out he never had any war wounds. And he claimed, the big claim to fame with Dianetics and Scientology was Hubbard used it to cure himself of his war wounds. And it was that claim that is the fundamental basis of believing that Dianetics and Scientology will work. Okay. So kind of significant things to find out. And so I got out in 2013. I was declared officially an enemy of the church because I started speaking out publicly against it, which is a big no-no. On video, on the internet, I started my own YouTube channel. And I started writing and speaking against it. I wrote a book about it. Not a memoir. It's an actual critical analysis of the subject. I actually break it all down for people. Who L. Ron Hubbard was, the tax exemption, the practices, the beliefs, all of it. It's all in my book. And then I've been speaking out ever since. And that the subjects that I've talked about have widened. At first it was just Scientology. Then it kind of got into like Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and other cults. And I started hooking up with survivors of these groups who were similar to me, who had started their own YouTube channels, and we started collaborating and doing work together. We have a regular series on my podcast where the Three Apostates, which is me, a former Mormon, and a former Jehovah's Witness, and we compare and contrast, worldviews and what's going on now, and how the church deals with sexuality or education or holidays or whatever. We talk about that stuff, and that's just one of many, many, many series and podcasts and stuff I've done. I've produced hundreds of videos. So it's now my interests are far beyond Scientology. That's how I built an audience, but now I'm kind of taking that audience off to, neuroscience, psychology, sociology. Like I've interviewed professionals. I have a lot of friends. I built up this little network of professional people that I get on my show to talk about this stuff. Psychologists, cult therapists, cult re-education specialists, stuff like that. And it's been quite a journey. And I've basically been documenting my own recovery and reassimilation into the real world, you know,
Hmm.
and that whole process. And that's what my channel has basically been. And so that's me. That's
Can
who I am.
can I ask you a difficult question? Maybe it's easy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll let you decide the difficulty of this.
Sure, fire away.
How do you think knowledge operates outside of a cult? You say you're interviewing psychologists and neuroscientists, and is there a different way that knowledge and communication operate outside of a cult that will let us know when we are passing into like some sort of cult organization?
Yeah, there are very specific red flags. Um, there's actually a checklist that I use that was put together by a couple PhD level sociologists about the characteristics of a destructive cult. Cult is obviously a problematic word. So I always take care to say destructive cult to be very clear about what I'm talking about. Because cult is really just short for culture. You know, all groups are cults in a way. If you have a culture developed, then you got a cult. But destructive cult has, you know, the authoritarian leadership. Basically, I've whittled it down as a very, very reductionist definition to a destructive cult is an abusive relationship, whether it's a narcissist and his partner, or it's L. Ron Hubbard and, you know, thousands of followers. It's that there's still the abusive relationship between the two, the codependency and the abusive aspects of it are the same. The dynamics are the same. So knowledge doesn't really change in terms of how knowledge works. It's the degree or severity of belief and certainty. It's the inability to critically think on the topic. That's another way I've sort of reductionist down to a very, you know, almost a mantra, but it's a workable piece of information, which is the more you're led down a spectrum of extremism of belief on anything, what that really means in practical terms is that your ability to critically think about that topic has been gradually worn away or eroded, so you no longer question the dictates and guides and practices of that activity. And it can be very micro-specific. So you can get people who are evangelicals and are hardcore on that belief system, and yet are PhD level scientists.
Okay.
Right? Because it wears away their critical thinking on that topic, but not about everything, you know. So that's kind of been my experience with that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Can you tell when somebody's, I guess, when you're interacting with knowledge in a scientific way or in a discursive, investigative way, there's a different just mode of being. When you're interacting with somebody who, I guess, is adherent to a cult, whether it's destructive or non-destructive, that's where certainty kind of picks up and clamps down on the mode of discovery, the mode of, I guess, conveying that belief. Did you have to break down your certainty? Is that something that you had to break down? And can you describe if that was painful or confusing,
Yes.
or what was that about? And what do you replace your certainty with?
That's the problem, because there isn't anything to replace it with, because, you know, the world is uncertain. And I have climbed mountains of knowledge with sociology, psychology, neuroscience. I mean, I've talked to people who really know what they're talking about on these topics, and quantum physics too. By the way, I know a friend of mine who's a quantum physicist, and a former Scientologist too, by the way. And what you find, what I struggled with, what was a very, very, very difficult process for me, was learning to accept uncertainty. You know, as a second generation Scientologist, nobody ever asked me if I wanted to believe these things. I was raised to believe these things. Same way Christians is, you know, Muslims, etc. I mean, when you're raised in the household, it's not a matter of, you know, anybody ever asked you to think critically about this stuff. So I never had any other idea than that we are spiritual entities and we have lived nearly infinite time into the past through past lives, and we will live forever. We can't die as entities, right? And we're just going to keep when we're just stuck in this endless repetition of life after life after life. And Scientology, it was presented to me very young as the only road out of that trap, that prison that we all live in. So I never ever had the idea that there was some other reality to life until I became much older and started thinking about other ideas. So that's indoctrination, right? And that's one of the reasons why I talk about, I think religious indoctrination in the young is almost tantamount to child abuse in some ways, because you're installing ideas that these children cannot think critically about. And these are not truth ideas. These are faith-based ideas, right? So I have a little bit of a problem with that. But the certainty question, getting back to that was probably the most difficult part of the recovery process for me, was getting to a place where I was okay with not having that level of certainty. And I was very sure as a Scientologist that I had all the answers to life, because I was told I did repetitively. I mean, this is very, very much a message of Scientology. In fact, in 1954, L. Ron Hubbard called Scientology the science of certainty.
Oh, okay. At least he
Right?
was upfront about that.
Yes, he was not. He was very bold in his claims, and I mean, he was making claims about Dianetics and Scientology curing cancer and leukemia and bad eyesight and all kinds of things. So that certainty was created a kind of narcissism, a kind of arrogance in my worldview. It does that with people. That's that's one of the products of Scientology, or cults in general, really, is they kind of create a narcissistic sort of attitude that everything there is to know that's important. And that certainty that you have is that everyone else just needs to get on board with this, and then everything will be fine. And I think that translates quite well to the critical race theory and critical theories that are being taught in universities these days. Is they're being taught this victimology, that they are this way, that society is this way, that these power structures exist and they will always exist, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you're very carefully indoctrinated that they are victims and always will be victims. And that there are victimizers, and those victimizers will always be victimizers. They can't help it. Even if they say they don't want to be, they are. It's this really crazy sort of extremist belief set. And that's what I recognize in it and go, I need to push back against that. That's wrong. It's not right to cultivate being a victim. I am a victim of an oppressive system. I was trafficked. I was a slave. And I don't use those words in a hyperbolic sense. I could give you all the details of it. I've laid it out in my channel in detail. But that is what happened to me as a Scientologist, as a Sea Org member. It wasn't just a matter of I needed to believe some things. I was physically sequestered, physically imprisoned, physically abused. So I understand what systemic problems look like. I understand what it is to live under the yoke of a suppressive, oppressive system that doesn't care about what you have to say about it. And no one in the group cares about what you think. You have to conform, right? I have been all the way down that rabbit hole. The only way I could have had it worse is if I'd ended up in a North Korean or Chinese re-education camp where they physically would have beat me into it. Everything that happened to me was mostly psychological, but sleep deprivation, food deprivation, and peer pressure are powerful tools in that tool set. I had a little bit of a hard time watching these black students talk about being oppressed while they're eating pizza. That was like a bit much to me when I've actually lived it. You know what I mean? So I don't have a lot of patience for that kind of thing, but that's where I'm coming from.
Bringing up what's happening now, and from my experience, I watched the Evergreen State College indoctrinate the students, and then the students act out this belief system to its final apotheosis, or its zenith. by which I mean, what does it become when everybody believes it and follows it through to the end? What it does is establish a racial hierarchy. It takes the racial hierarchy that everybody believes, where white people are on top, and it inverts it, where now white people are servants, going around handing out water, sitting in the back, standing up, going to the front of the line, doing everything that they're told. And then there's this struggle session aspect of it, where you take the authority and you grind them down, and you grind them down, and you grind them down.
Exactly.
It doesn't do anything productive except for extract demands and resources from the power structure in order to ultimately to, I guess, right or give reparations to past struggles.
Right.
But now I'm seeing across the board, across America, institution after institution, public education, private companies, they're all now adopting the core tenets. They're all now beginning to teach Robin DiAngelo and anti-racism. And people don't see the end of it. They don't see where this leads. They're just presented with this fact that racism is everywhere, that white people are inherently racist and privileged, and that everybody who's not white is a victim. And what do you do with that? You don't even know what to do with it. You just stew in it, and you perform these meditations, I guess, on your privilege, and you contemplate it, and then you apologize, but the next step, once everybody's on board with this, is the shuffling around of resources based on race. Is the what do you? So my question is,
the ultimate racist structuring.
It's a complete.
In the name of eradicating racism, they are establishing structures that ensure nothing but a racist society.
And my question is, how do we inoculate people against this? Like, what are some of the tools that people can enter into? And I guess doubt is one of the tools that I'm using right now. I'm just performing doubt. I'm just taking it and I'm questioning it. Because I know inside of these seminars, you're not allowed to question, especially if you're white. You're told directly, do not question this. If you have any discomfort, it's actually defensiveness. It's your racism exerting itself.
That's right. It's very circular logic, right? There's no out. There's double binds. They're called double binds. They're everywhere throughout this material. They're very carefully crafted to be that way, by the way. There's no way that's an accident. These people have figured this out. Now, I don't mean that they're twirling their mustache and, in smoke-filled rooms or something. It's just the way the thinking works. People ask all the time about whether cult leaders all, sort of read the same playbook or something. Well, they do, but it's an organically created thing in their minds. The cult leader playbook is really the pattern of how a sociopath thinks and controls people. And that's where they come from. This business of using emotional control, information control, limiting the amount of information available to people, saying that this is valid and this is not. So this is all you get to look at. You don't ever even get to consider the other side or anything other than what I am saying is true. And if you question it in any way, you are not part of this group anymore. The whole, they use the levers of evolution of our social hierarchies as we have evolved them against individuals to peer pressure them into thinking, to conforming, really is what it is. It's about conforming. At the end of the day, it's really about that. You will conform. And all the racial, oppression and this and that, and we this and that, all these horrible things that have happened to us over all these hundreds of years that are now, that I am now taking as a big pile of oppression and saying it's on my head. That's what gives me power to tell you what to do. And I'm going to guilt and shame you into it. These are all check the boxes of the sociopathic, cult leader playbook. So that's so it's not even a matter of they have to think it through what they're doing. They just automatically do this because this is how they think.
At Evergreen, there was if you just study it as the beta test for what's going to happen everywhere else.
Yes.
What you have is most people. Was that what was going through your head?
That's exactly what I was watching this and I'm going. We used to call it in Scientology. We would call it a pilot program, We're going to pilot this. We're going to see how this rolls out, see what the kinks are, work it out, you know. That's exactly what that was. And I was very curious. I was noting down a couple names of some of the teachers, but I think that president is the one who seems to have been leading the charge, you know, and he comes in there and he's all about critical race theory, every word and breath. And it was scary watching him elucidate how freedom of speech is an unfortunate thing that they have to somehow step around when he was in that meeting with those students, right, who were just being victims. They're just sitting there being, I'm so oppressed, I'm so oppressed. About what? When? Where? How? Where were you oppressed, right? Not one example given, just we're all oppressed and it's just oppressive, and look at all this oppression that we're suffering. While they're getting to push cops back, eat pizza, and roam around physically intimidating people and getting teachers fired. Yeah, they're the oppressed ones. That's a fascinating contradiction. And the really scary thing about the extremist mindset is they are completely unaware of the context in which they're talking. When they were delivering that narrative of what happened, with the police came and we were scared for our lives and we had to retreat and all, they really think that's what happened. They're not just sitting there making that shit up going, oh, now we'll say this and now we'll say this. She really perceived events that way and wrote them down according to how she saw them or how other people, you know, told her it was. That's reality as far as they're concerned. It's delusional.
Yeah, it's a holographic delusion. That's what's scary about it, because every individual in that group has a piece of the puzzle, and they construct this three-dimensional narrative all together. And nobody really planned it. Everything was just there for it to happen. There's all these little. George Bridges didn't want that to happen. Like, the leader of it, the president, didn't want that to happen. You could probably argue that a couple of teachers wanted that, because they're once you get further in the series, you see what they really want. They're just filled with vengeance and resentment for whatever reason. But the problem that I'm facing right now is
series.
Pardon me?
It's a long series.
Yeah, it's a little long.
Just teasing.
I went a little overboard.
Videos. It's not a problem. I'm totally just ribbing you.
But what you have is a small.
It was kind of a cauldron of ingredients.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just waiting and there was some TNT thrown in there, and it was just kind of like, okay, eventually this is going to blow up. You know?
What you have is a small number of radicals. The people on top empower the radicals, and then the radicals herd everybody else. And then you have very few. You have Brett Weinstein, Mike Peros, Alan Nasser, and eventually me speaking out about it. Well, I was speaking out about it, but I was just a student, right? But most people are just quiet and just like, okay, well, if I stand up against this, then they're going to dogpile on me, like they did with Brett Weinstein. So there's a whole bunch of incentives to not speak up and to go along. How do we convince people who don't want to be put in that uncomfortable position that if they do disagree with this in a little bit altogether, it will stop them from the whole mass? And maybe it's too late because of the way that the pressure cook is built up across America, but I still think that normal people have control as long as they exert agency and independence from it. How do you convince somebody like that? Or how do you convince them that they need to do that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. You know, everybody's coming at this with their own degree of trepidation, fear, willingness to speak up, ability to speak up, ability to think through things. You know, we're not all on a level playing field, you know, as far as how we approach this stuff. I always try to encourage critical thinking and simple tests that almost anybody could use, or simple truths that everybody agrees with, right? Can you know, like with a cult, right? A real simple way to cut through the bullshit with a cult is, well, what happens if what do they do if you try to leave? Right? That almost is a universal thermometer for whether you're part of a destructive cult or not. Because if you want to leave, You can leave if you're in a destructive cult, in a regular group, in any kind of regular group. If you leave, no big deal,
Okay.
whatever.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
So I tried to come up with like simple exercises like that almost anybody could understand. Um, but mostly it's a matter of trying to get people invested in the idea in the first place, especially with this stuff, because this is complicated. Critical race theory is fucking difficult to understand. That's not like these authors are making themselves, they're not good communicators, you know. Um, but somehow this has just become so entrenched. And I think one of the reasons why is because people like to be victims.
It preys upon very, just on a narrative level, and this is how I originally deconstructed it in my own head, like working my way out of it. Even though I wasn't a believer, I was in it and I was surrounded by it, and it was enforced upon me to go along with these programs. But just thinking of it as a story, it's like, okay, that's a very convincing story that there is David and Goliath. It's part of our narrative tradition, but
Exactly.
it doesn't allow David to it denies David the ability to recognize the Goliath that he becomes, right? So you have a David Goliath thing, and then all of a sudden you have a Goliath that's just turning everybody into its fodder. That's what happens at the Evergreen State College. That's what happens with this way of thinking, where you foist upon this individual the status of victim. What's the possibility for them to act out? What are the different characters that can come about if you're a victim? You become some sort of vengeful Batman, like going around like taking vengeance upon the city for taking your parents away. You become apathetic and I don't know the polite way of saying it, but you just become just some sort of worm on society, just feeding up, just eating up society because it owes you all of this stuff. There's just different sorts of character traits that become pronounced, and they're not healthy if you run them all the way down the road.
No,
It's an imbalanced narrative.
very much so. I look at this whole thing very similar to the communist revolution. Now I'm not a, I love history, but I don't know all the details of all these things, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I will say that here you have Marx, who writes this book, right, Das Kapital, and puts this philosophy forward, and it eventually kind of grows into this thing that Lenin and Trotsky and these guys go forward with, and they're gonna down with the autocracy, down with the authoritarianism. We're gonna get rid of these guys. And they had tried to assassinate, the Tsar a few times, and that never really flew. And it was finally like, okay, it's, because it was kind of like Keystone Cops with those guys. And so then finally they incite the revolution, right? And it's like, okay, here we go. And they overthrow everything. And then we get 90 years of fucking bullshit. Because what always happens, and what these fucking assholes never remember, is they ain't the ones who are going to be in charge. They never remember that. These people call themselves students of history, and they've never learned the most important lessons, which is that the academics are the first ones to get lined up against the wall and killed. And that includes these fucking people. Robin DiAngelo would not survive the end of the revolution.
No, they're already trying to cancel her because she's making money off of black pain.
There you go. There you go. Right. So symbolically, we even have that happening now. Not physically with bullets, right? But it happened. This isn't, the Maoist revolution, Pol Pot. I mean, we see this, right? This is all based on you come up with this the intellectuals go, hey, this kind of stuff's kind of bullshit, all this authoritarian stuff. Maybe we should push back against some of this. And then they come up with some half-baked ideas that make sense in some ways and don't make sense in other ways. But they're pushing back against the system they're living in, which is an authoritarian system. I mean, it's not like the czars were great people. And it's not like Russia was flourishing under them, but it was better than what came. And that's always the way it goes. Same Cuba, same things. It's like, yeah, there was some oppressive shit going on. There always is. But the pushback against it, when the solution becomes, the new problem, is always how it goes. And so that's how I kind of see what's happening with all this. Is here's a base on which some really stupid fucking people who can't think with unintended consequences put together and said, well, postmodernism, right? The Enlightenment didn't work, and we still have slavery, and we still have this, and we still have that. So it's all bad, and we just have to tear it all down. And that's really, as far as I can tell, the fundamental bedrock basis of the entire philosophy is none of this shit's working, so let's just deconstruct the whole thing and start again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I even see the point. I mean, I would very clearly argue and have for the deconstruction of Scientology. It's a bad system from top to bottom.
Yeah.
I get it. I get where that viewpoint comes from. I don't think that anymore. Now I'm kind of like, well, all right, whatever. People are going to believe whatever they're going to believe.
Yeah.
But it's the how do you prevent that cycle of history is kind of the point I'm making. How do you, it's beyond any individual. We can't. We're caught up in forces with sociology that are way beyond any one of us. So all we can really do at this point, and what I've really reconciled myself to, because I was on a save the world kick.
Yeah.
The reason I was in Scientology, the bedrock fundamental that I bought into with Scientology was that as bad as it got, as trafficked as I got, as abused as I got, and I knew I was being abused while it was happening. It wasn't like I was like, thank you, sir, may I have another? I hated it. But I was saving the world. So who saves the world without some sacrifice? No one. You got to sacrifice. You got to give up the movies. You got to give up the time off. You got to give up the good food, the good life. I used to literally fantasize about steak dinners. Like that's where I was at, right? Like steak dinners to me were the ultimate expression of a good time. That's how I used to be when I was, eating my runny eggs. So, so saving the world is like, forget it. That's just another control mantra. That's just another thought-stopping cliche. No one's saving the world. The world doesn't need saving. Instead, we as individuals have to stand up for our individual rights and encourage others to do the same. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much all we can do.
When you increase the stakes so high, where you're saving the world against, in this instance, against racism.
Yeah,
and
that's what
we're going to end racism.
Yep.
Like, okay, good luck with that. But why would you say no? Okay, let's do it. Let's go forward. Right. And then you turn up the pressure. That's what happened at Evergreen. That's what's happening right now. We had 3 months of quarantine. Everybody's like just stewing. Yep. And now we have this huge release of energy. Yep. And now this ideology's here to give us cause, to give us purpose. And if you actually look at the purpose, it's so universal and the stakes are so high and so immediate. This is the question. There's certain people who are going to get on board with this and then eventually say, wait, there's something that doesn't add up.
Yep. Right.
And then there's certain people who get on board with this and then they rise through the ranks. And I wonder if you have any insight into what kind of people in Scientology eventually kept on rising through the ranks. Like, is there not certain personality traits or orientations?
Well, okay, I will push back against certain personality types as such.
Please do.
Because psychology, we ain't that good yet. We don't have it figured out. I can't talk intelligently about personality types. We don't even, what is personality? What does that even mean, right? I mean, you start diving into some of these concepts and you find out it's just air. So, so I will push back on that. But what I will say is that there are, for whatever reason, maybe it has to do with background or education or, in the case of racism, certainly culture. Socioeconomic status, I think, has a lot to do with it because I think the real problem in America is classism, not racism. But that make people more susceptible to believing in their victimhood. And then what happens is you start getting social status for it. And then you realize, maybe unconsciously, maybe consciously, I think, in fact, that's the difference between the sociopath and the regular person is that the sociopath has a conscious understanding that this is happening and they proceed anyway, Whereas the person who's not a sociopath, who has empathy, who can understand and wants tolerance and compassion for other people, doesn't necessarily have this as a calculated effort. But the path they both go on is using that victimhood to gain more status and control over others so that they don't feel like that they are a victim anymore. Now they get to be the oppressor, and they start cherishing that role. And that's the flip, right? That's where, and there's a flip there. And like I said, sometimes they're not even aware of it. They're so caught up in the movement. I didn't think I was oppressing people as a Sea Org member. Goddamn right I was. I was doing horrible things to people, in the name of saving the world, in the name of getting their ethics in. We were really big on ethics as a term. That was a control term in Scientology. You could control behavior by calling people ethical or unethical.
Yes.
That was kind of the control point, right? Your ethics are out. You cheated on your wife. How dare you, right? Now we're going to, your ethics are out. And according to our standards of morality, and now we're going to enforce that on you. And once you give somebody that kind of power, and you've indoctrinated them into an ideology of us versus them, because us versus them is a big part of this. Black and white thinking and us versus them are key elements of this. As long as the ideology is along those lines, you've made a monster. Right?
I was thinking about I was thinking about last night about the inversion of the classic principle of civil rights is judging people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That is now being inverted, where we are supposed to judge everybody by the color of their skin, and the content of their character comes in doing that. But I was thinking about the operative term in that formulation is judgment. And one of the things you can actually analyze how this movement is judging people by reducing them into good or bad people, what you're bringing up with ethical or non-ethical, right? And then the counter to that is, what is the role of judging another person? Why do we judge other people? And how do you judge other people in a way that actually unlocks potential rather than creates a modus of control or locus of control?
I was going to look up the characteristics of a destructive cult for you, because maybe if we went down some of them, it might help clarify some of these answers.
Yeah, go ahead and look that up.
Yeah, doctors Yanya Lalich and Michael Langone put this together. Michael Langone is the head of the International Cultic Studies Association, which is an international group of academics, scholars, therapists who work on cult education and cult recovery efforts. They do workshops and conferences and stuff like that. A lot of books and papers written on this stuff. And Yanya Lalich is a cult survivor, political cult, not a religious cult. And it's amazing where cults show up, by the way. Martial arts dojos, sports clubs. It's not all just religious.
Wherever particular people congregate.
Basically. Yeah, because like I said, it's an abusive relationship. Yeah. So if you get you get an abuser, you get a narcissist, and you get his followers. That's all you need. Okay, so in terms of cult patterns, let me answer the last question you asked first, though, because I feel like that's hanging a little bit. What exactly was your question?
Well, I was just thinking about the proper way to judge somebody. Because Martin Luther King says, I want my kids to be judged based on this, not on that. But I think that the mode of judgment in and of itself has been mangled up, and we don't really understand the process of judging people and why we judge people and why that's actually something we can't get away from, but it can be hijacked. So I was just thinking last night about, why do I judge other people? Because I'm not going to stop judging other people, but what's the healthy way to do that?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, okay, so first off, the reason for it has to do with social hierarchies, right? They are artificial constructs in a way, but they're built into us to do it. We can't help it. We're never going to be able to help it. We always line up based on whatever it is we've been taught is important. So if skin color is taught to you as the important thing, then that's how you're going to line people up. It's indoctrination, right? Children are taught this wherever they grow up, the values that they learn. And I call it indoctrination because their understanding isn't consulted or can't be consulted because they're not old enough to have judgment yet. And almost all of the deeply held beliefs and fundamental ways we operate are indoctrinated into us before we're 3 years old. The mere fact of where we're born, to whom we're born, to where we go to school, who our friends are going to be, who our parents and relatives are, what religion we're going to be, what language we're going to speak. None of those are left up to us. And the answer to every one of those questions is a formative part of our personality. It's fundamental. And we were never consulted about any of it. So all of those values are basically baked into you before you're able to actually even start thinking about them. So, when you talk about, how do we come to decisions about things? Well, it varies based on all those factors. Mm-hmm. That's why we're so wildly different from one person to the mm-hmm. next, because you pile all that onto a genetic lottery that how our brains and our genes are put together is roll of the dice in many ways. So in a way, it's kind of amazing we get along at all.
But there's an ethical and a productive and a non-productive way of evaluating other people, of establishing hierarchies. The postmodernist, I think of them as the postmodern Sith, because I think there's a good postmodernism and a bad postmodernism. Yes. But their constant rally cry is, we're going to dismantle systems of power. We're going to dismantle systems of power. We're going to dismantle systems of power. And but you're just going to institute another system of power. And how do you institute a good system of hierarchy? What is the proper basis of that?
That's the key question. And the thing is that I was talking about this the other day on a live stream, is there is no such thing as a perfect human system. There is no perfect human system. And I don't know, based on how we think and how we are put together, that there ever will be. And by perfect, I mean, for example, one that everybody would agree with, one that everybody would get along in, one that everybody would be happy with. Because you can't have a group of people get together under any circumstances at all and have everybody on the same page. Because the moment you do, you got a cult.
Once you implement a system of hierarchy that has certain rules to it, that polices behavior, that I guess you said the leaving and the coming and going is policed, and agreement and disagreement are regulated due to its relationship to certainty. I guess there's other qualities and stuff. And that is, I'm trying to get my head around that in the context of, you're working at a grade school, all of a sudden Black Lives Matter is the modus operandi of the school. That's what happened at Evergreen. The president came in and said, racial inequality is the reason we're here. This is the problem of the day. And then, then here's anti-racist work. And anti-racist work says everybody's racist. There's no way around it. And white people are more racist than other people. And and you cannot question it. And even if you do question it, it's because of your racism. Everything revolves around that.
It's a circular logic.
It's a circular logic.
Questions you can't get out of the system.
And how do you, before it's implemented, how do you say to the leader, okay, this is the outcome of it. This is the problem with it. These are and reserve. Okay, if we want to go down the road of equality, here's an alternative. I don't have the alternative. They have developed a very good problem solution set. I don't have an alternative yet.
Because exactly. One, I would say, first off, and I know this isn't necessarily practical, but I'm just going to say it anyway, is the president was off the rails in the first place for even bringing it into the university. It was completely non sequitur to the entire purpose of the activity. And it derailed the entire purpose of higher education to bring that into an institute of higher learning, because the entire model is built on thought control and censorship of ideas. So, so how is this, to teach about it is certainly something we would want higher education to do. To teach it as a truth and the only acceptable truth, social truth, that's where it went off the rails. And I'm wondering, maybe you can let me know about this. This guy, George, the president, I looked him up a little bit. It wasn't really a whole lot on his Wikipedia page, but it looked to me like he entered into the university already having bought into this bullshit.
He's been working on it since for his doctorate. That's what his doctorate was on.
Right. He talked about that study that he did where they were trying to reform the justice system, and good on him for doing that, because there are inequities in our justice system. I'm not going to argue against that. I know it. It's true for myself. I've seen it. And that's the insidiousness of these things is the degree with which they appear to align with facts, objective facts you can't argue.
Yeah.
And that's how these systems of thought always enter in, as they go, well, fact A, fact B, fact C, illogical conclusion, almost non sequitur conclusion D. That's the entry. The facts are the entry point, right?
And they're really good at covering that leap, that place between the fact and the belief.
That's right. And that's the difference between an intelligent sociopath or narcissist or cult leader and the unintelligent ones who really never get along in life and don't really get followers and stuff. It's the sneaky, crafty ones who figure out those bridges. It's gaslighting, it's confirmation bias. They just run down a litany of logical fallacies that people buy into. And the struggle for us, and the thing I've had to learn about over the last 7 years, is overcoming some fundamental ideas that all of us sort of kid ourselves about. We're rational creatures. No, we're not. Right? We are not. We think, emotions and thought are at war in our heads. No, they're not. Emotions are just another kind of thought. The neurons aren't any different. They're not happening in a special place in your brain. It's not that, the Star Trek model kind of gives us this breakdown, but it's an artificial breakdown of Mr. Spock and Bones and Captain Kirk in between, right? And we sort of model this as though this is how our brain works, and it doesn't. It's not like that at all. So we are able to be ramped up into fight or flight.
Yep.
And then in that mode where the frontal lobes are not the part of the brain that are operating, we buy into bullshit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's exactly what's happening on a massive scale. Everybody's been ramped up all of a sudden. And that just shuts down critical thought.
That's right.
And it incentivizes shutting down people who exhibit critical thought. And
exactly.
We're seeing one person after another fired and pushed out of their jobs, which is,
and the only solution is a one-on-one. That's why I wish somebody had sat George down before any of this shit had happened, and said, let's walk through the unintended consequences of some of this, shall we?
Okay. Yeah.
And actually, because then you are engaging somebody when their frontal lobes are still going, and if you can't. See, here's when you're talking to a cult member, right? Or somebody who has gone down a cult thinking rabbit hole or extremism or whatever word you want to use. They can't respond rationally to what you're saying. They can't chill themselves out on the topic under discussion.
Yeah.
They're constantly in this. You saw that with those girls, the black girls, the one especially, fuck him, fuck all his students, fuck Brett Weinstein. It was just like, you're never going to reason with her.
Yeah.
She's off in some delusional fairy tale land of existence. She's not seeing you. She's not hearing the words you're saying. This perception thing is real important too. You know about that, right? That people don't see what's in front of them. They see what they think they're going to see. This is actually neuroscience. It's not my opinion. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
this is some fresh take I have. This is actually cutting edge knowledge that's coming out of neuroscience. Is the way the brain works. It's predictive. It's called predictive coding, and it feeds into why confirmation bias is a thing. It's not just a psychological model. It's an actual physical thing that's happening. Your brain doesn't perceive and then feed you the information, and then you think about it, and go, oh, here's what's happening. Here's, there's an apple on the table in front of me, right? That's not how it works. How it works is you go through life using your past experiences to predict what's going to be in front of you, and most of the time you're right, because you've been in the rooms, you've been in your house, you know what it looks like, you familiarize yourself with places and stuff. So you're constantly predicting what's going to be, what you're going to see, what you're going to hear, and what you're going to taste, etc. And that little shock you get when you run into a wall, or you hear something unexpectedly, and you're like, whoa, and it almost feels like a little shock. That's the moment when your brain realizes it has not predicted properly, and it's actually newly processing the information it's receiving, and you're like, oh. It wakes you up, right? You're like, ah, that's that process. That's a physical process. So she's not hearing you. She's hearing what she thinks you're saying.
Yeah.
Right? This is a really, really important part. I don't think I've really gotten this across to too many people as like the level of importance of it, but it's super important to understanding why people don't hear you or don't see you or don't respond to you in odd ways. It's because they are already sure.
Yeah.
And remember about what we were saying about certainty.
Yeah. Yeah.
The cult indoctrination makes it so that they're less and less willing to reevaluate what they're hearing and seeing, because they already know what you're going to say. They already know who you are. They already know everything about you. They don't have to listen to you. I don't have to listen to Brett Weinstein. Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
He's a racist. His emails proved it. You read into these emails. I'd like to see the whole email chain. There wasn't anything racist in there.
No.
But these guys are so indoctrinated into everything's racist. It was like Anita Sarkeesian years ago. Everything's sexist. Everything's, it's just like.
Well, here's a question for you, and maybe you can draw on your personal experience, but also your learned experience from other people.
Yeah.
Is that there's a sunk cost fallacy going on where, and it's tied to their status, that if they do see the problems with this, what they've bought into, then they're going to lose face, right? And I've been like thinking about this for a few years. It's like, okay, eventually these, I used to call them social justice warriors, but now it's just American citizens, because everybody's a social justice warrior now.
Right.
So eventually they're going to be confronted by such a strong amount of cognitive dissonance or whatever.
Yep.
And they're going to have to go down that uncomfortable path of just admitting their shame. But there's got to be a middle ground where you can just ease people in, or you just let them fall, right? Like, how do you give them a little bit of wiggle room to think through things without having to defend their status, having to defend their worldview?
Oh, yeah. You have to talk about it in third person. You always have, you avoid personal pronouns, for one, right? It's not about you. Okay, yes. If you want to convince somebody, if you want to convince a Scientologist that they're in a cult, you educate them about how the JWs are a cult. You see what I mean?
Okay.
You make it non-threatening.
Okay.
This is super important, because that's, again, it's taking great care to avoid their fight or flight kicking in. If you make them feel defensive, their fight or flight kicks in. If you put them on the spot, if you ask them challenging questions to them.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So they're going to double down, triple down, quadruple down. And after they've quadrupled down, again, this has to do with biology, neural pathways are being literally strengthened by doing that. That's what habits are. So that's how we.
What do you
So
mean? So they're habituated to just to not accept any criticism whatsoever at any
yeah,
level?
yeah, exactly. You can get a person. Extremism is a thought process that is unimpeded by any doubts or uncertainties, right? So it's kind of a mainline highway that's been built in your brain through repetition. This is why thought-stopping cliches and mantras are so important to cult indoctrination. You keep repeating the same pieces of information over and over and over again. It's literally making it's drawing highways in your brain. So the only way to overcome that is to rewrite that neurology, right? And the only way to do that is the guy has to. The way I put it is, they build a thought fortress. We all have them. We all have our deeply held beliefs. We have our thought fortress. You're never ever going to change somebody's mind by battering at the walls. You can't, a frontal assault will hardly ever tear down those walls. If it's a strong enough assault over a long enough period of time, you'll break through those walls. But we call that torture.
Yeah.
Right? So
And brainwashing, yeah.
do that. We don't want that.
Yeah.
We want so what you have to do is you have to get the person to invite you in. It's the only way. To change the hearts and minds, right? So, and the only way you'll get invited in is if you're considered at least not an enemy, maybe not a friend, but you can't be an enemy. You don't invite enemies into your home, right? What you said earlier reminded me of the Upton Sinclair quote. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Right? Same thought, right? The whole confirmation bias thing.
You made me think of that on Twitter and on social media when somebody says a statement that's out there, like one of these statements that's out there, somebody will come along and say, repeating it doesn't make it true.
Yep.
But that's not, it's actually, repeating it does make it real.
Yes,
Repeating it does make it real. So
right.
For an example, we don't have to go down this path, but trans women are women, trans women are women, trans women are women. The people just repeat it. And then when somebody says something against that, like J.K. Rowling did, like, no, women are women, trans women are trans women, it's like, no, that's not real. You are wrong. You are wrong, you're wrong, and we are going to push you out, and we're going to slam you down, and no matter what you say, we're going to burn your books or scribble your name off the books because we love the books so much. That's what one opinion writer even said, that J.K. Rowling should stop writing now. So a writer told another writer to stop writing.
Right. And they don't even see the ridiculousness of what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right? To them, it makes total sense. I used to rail against psychiatry. Scientology has a huge problem with psychiatry.
Why?
Huge. Because Hubbard was knocking the competition. No, in in all fairness, in 1950, when Hubbard came up with Dianetics and Scientology 70 years ago, psychiatry was very different, and it was barbaric. There's no other words for it. Transorbital lobotomies. They were ripping people apart. I mean, 1950, psychiatrists were still wearing lab coats. It was bad, and they were butchers. And he definitely had points in speaking up against it. Psychology and psychiatry have evolved quite a bit since then, but Scientology doesn't recognize that evolution because L. Ron Hubbard's words are always true. And his words being true trump reality. Right? And that's what happens in cults is it's not, doesn't have to be true, it just has to be reality, right? This is going to be my new reality. Yeah.
I saw a video a few years ago of whoever David Mikovich or whoever's Mikevich. There was this big ceremony about they found new books, right? We found the new revelation, and like, well, how does the cult update its belief system? Like, we found a new hole in the ground.
That's right.
We're going to pull this stuff out, but it has to update. So these systems have to update, and how they go about updating themselves is, I guess, another way of investigating their true claims or their ties to reality.
That's right. Exactly. With the Mormons, you have the prophets. right? There's always a living prophet, and he is the guy who can, or a number of them, but it's certainly at least one, who can rewrite their scriptures or their dogma. I mean, up until 1979, black people were, that was the mark of Cain in the
Mm.
Mormon religion. If you were a black person, that meant you had in the past, you had fought in the army of rebellious angels against God, and that's why you're black. That was literally their scriptures. That was their dogma. That's why black people existed until 1979 when they had a new prophecy, a new revelation, right? Oh, hey, no, we were wrong about that. But they never say we were wrong. They just say, oh, here's the new revealed truth. That suddenly gays are okay in the Mormons, or kind of becoming okay, right? Again, because it was a statement from the prophet. With Miscavige, he gets to find not new books, what he actually said, and you might find this intriguing because it's an interesting fine point. The transcriptionists and the typists and the editors who had worked on L. Ron Hubbard's works had messed it up. See, L. Ron Hubbard's infallible, so you can't fuck with L. Ron Hubbard. But the people who translated L. Ron Hubbard's works, right? The editors, the copywriters, the typists, they messed it all up. And now we've got it all fixed because we found it and we corrected it. And literally what they just got away with is rewriting L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
But they did it in this crafty way, So it's just it's a little fine point, but it's an interesting one.
When you brought up doubling, tripling, quadrupling down, that's what the Evergreen State College has done. And they've gone so far as to, I suspect, pay a company to scrub me from the internet or heavily downrank me on Google because I keep on presenting this evidence that they are going down the wrong path. Plus, they're paid to not make up for their mistakes. But just thinking about how I'm treated as a voice in Washington locally, and how it's kind of known that I am alt-right, that I'm an alt-right individual who's pushing these ultra-conservative ideas because I'm presenting as clearly as possible, and I do make missteps, and I do use wit, and I do use mockery sometimes. So I'm not like this clean, perfect image, and I don't claim to be, but because I'm presenting such uncomfortable material with regards to the Evergreen State College, and I'm sure within the next 6 weeks, we will have incontrovertible evidence that what happened at the Evergreen State College was really the pilot program. Like the ways that everybody's acting, the way that the leadership is acting, it's not just some crazy college in the woods. It's not anymore.
Right.
And
that's why I would like to have you on my podcast, by the way. Because I'd like to walk through the story with you in exactly that context.
Yeah.
Because I've already been saying stuff on my channel about some of this stuff too. I had Dr. Lindsay on a couple times on my podcast, and we've broken this stuff down. And
James Lindsay?
James Lindsay.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that. He's an awesome guy.
We did a podcast just a couple weeks ago called the Rise and Fall of Wokeness.
Yeah. Is it falling? Or just going to bring everything down?
I think I get less pushback on ridiculing that term than I thought I would. So that's why I think there's a little bit of a curve to that, because I know a lot of people who are sick and fucking tired of the woke crowd.
Yeah.
Because they see that these people are, one thing that we can get wrapped up in our own activism, and I've had to reel myself back a few times as a content creator and ex-Scientologist or ex-cult member and getting into these communities, is we can ourselves, because we're so hyper aware of the problem, can over-exaggerate it in our own heads too. Yeah. I've had many days where I have been sitting contemplating the end of the world because I thought we were on the brink of some kind of like horrible thing that was about to happen, because of, I'm so hyper aware of some of these groups and what they get up to. And then you kind of have to take a break for a few days, get off social media, and realize, oh, it's okay. We're going to be okay. And it's always a little, you always have to be, as an activist, we have a little trepidation with that, because we also don't want to undervalue it or try to make it less than it really is too. And I think the words we're saying right now about this Evergreen thing being a pilot program that will, that is expanding right now, I think what we're seeing is opportunism. We're seeing a not the end result of a carefully crafted conspiracy. We're seeing a confluence of events that have allowed these people to step up into the public forum in a way that they couldn't before. And I think it's always hard to tell when you're in the middle of it, of history, but in fact, it's impossible really to tell everything that's going on. But I think if none of this would have happened, if COVID hadn't happened, none of this would be happening right now, because we've had a lot of black people killed by a lot of black cops over the last few years, and this didn't happen. Why did this happen? Because everybody was fucking stir crazy. That's why. Did you notice how I tried to bring this up to people and push back a little bit? And nobody appreciated it. Did you notice how you're gonna like this? Okay, so all the right, the hillbillies and the hicks and the white trash and all that can't wait to go get their haircuts and go to restaurants and go out and go to the beaches of Florida and spring break, and all that happened, right? And all my left friends are like, those bastards, science, 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 right? And how dare they? And they're gonna die, and we're gonna get another spike, and but they're going crazy inside, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm stuck inside. So they're talking science, science, science. And then as soon as this happens, protests. And they all go hit the streets. And you go, what about the science? Social justice is more important.
Well, no, they literally say that. I think it was NPR that came out with why anti-racism is more important than the virus. And why these protests are so important right now. And then like 16 hours later, a day later, they're like, oh my God, Trump is going to have rallies. Trump is going to have rallies. Like all the people are going to die. Like, wait, hold on.
Right? And they don't even see the hypocrisy.
They don't see it.
Point this out. I tried to point this out, and nobody was having it. Nope, it's different. It's different. It's different. And you're just like, no, it's not different, you fucking asshole. It's not different. You are putting people's lives. People are going to die because of these protests. And you fucking people think you have the moral high ground, and you don't. Yeah. And I finally just said, okay, whatever. Somebody tried to tweet out something about something the right was doing with NASCAR or with something else, and I was like, you lost the moral high ground weeks ago. Just shut up. You lost it, man. You got no moral high ground right now to be lecturing anybody about going outside. Just shut up. Let me go over these characteristics with you, because I think you might find some of these interesting and useful. I hope useful.
Please.
There is no definitive checklist. Is first the disclaimer here, okay? There's no definitive checklist of a cult, okay, of a destructive cult. Every single group and every single situation has to be analyzed on its own merits. Okay, I got to stress that from the beginning, because this isn't a black and white thing, and I always take care to stress that, because of course we're talking about black and white thinking. The group displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader, and whether he is alive or dead, regards his belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth, capital T, as law. Okay? So excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment. Okay, second point. Questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished. Mind-altering practices, such as meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, and debilitating work routines, are used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leader. I used to have to go out and dig ditches and shit, right? You have to go out and do hard physical labor to contemplate the error of your ways. This kind of thing, right? So debilitating, so mind-altering practices are used to excess. In TM, in transcendental meditation, we see people sitting for 8 hours a day chanting their mantra to themselves, with the idea that they're going to levitate. And you do it for days and days and weeks and weeks and months and months. Your children are being abandoned. Your life is falling apart. But with TM at the highest levels, they even believe that all that chanting and every hour they spend doing their meditation is actually deconstructing some
Accumulating.
evil in the world.
Yes. Okay.
They're
Yeah.
saving the world through their
Yeah.
meditation, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if that translates into all the likes that you get on your Twitter post, right? Like that somehow you can change the world by accumulating enough agreement to your
Yep.
statement.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Plus, of course, we can't get away from social hierarchies. It's built into us. I think, what was it? Haidt said it's 90% monkey, 10% bee is
Mm,
what
hmm
human beings are, right? Like, it's intrinsic in us. It's not something we have to think about. It's not something we can avoid or get away from any more than we have an eyes and a nose.
hmm
We structure ourselves. We automatically line up. The only question is what we line up on. And generally speaking, the most powerful or strongest personality in the room is what's going to determine what we're going to line up on. Because we're literally built to accede to an authority figure.
hmm
It's just natural in us.
hmm
You know? And then we want to be the authority figure sometimes, but a lot of people don't. They're okay with being
But
followers.
generally speaking, some of the things that you're talking about are the wearing down of personal agency, personal authority, and the seeding of it more and more and reinforcing it into
Yes.
a central locus, being the leader.
Yes.
The thing is that we didn't talk about, but that I've been wondering about is the crowdsourced nature of what happened at the Evergreen State College. There were pockets of leaders, but it was a swarm. Like it really didn't
Mhm.
have and a lot of these movements right now. And I think I want to be careful. Black Lives Matter. It's non-centralized, so there's a lot of movements within that movement. But largely speaking, it's moving in concert to attain something. I don't know, or just just batter something down. I don't know. But do you have any thoughts about the non-leader cult? Is that such a thing possible?
It
And where
is.
is that leadership located?
Well, okay, so what you're actually talking about is more of a sociological phenomena of a hive or group mentality, which is also, of course, built into us, which is different from a cult
Okay.
relationship. They're
Okay.
actually two different things. Their behavior is very similar, though. And
Okay.
what we need to pay a lot of attention to with these kind of movements, especially with this, is the prior laying in of the indoctrination. You get enough people feeling like they are victims, feeling like they are living in a system of oppression, right? Convinced of this ideology. They all become ideologues.
hmm
And they're all on the same page because of that mass indoctrination. And so then it only takes little pushes, little reminders by strong voices,
Okay.
like that black girl, right? Fuck, she starts screaming, Well, why is she doing that? Because she's having her influence on the entire group, keeping them ramped up. Whereas, they're receiving rational communication from Brett. He's like, hey, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's it. Rah! It's not a reasoned response. It's fuck him, fuck Brett Weinstein. It riles everybody up again. So,
hmm
so there's that sociological phenomena of we don't operate well. Human beings don't do the drone mind thing super well for extended period of
Yes.
time. We're not as simple as bees and ants.
Yeah.
We, however, for short periods of time, we can be hypnotized. We can be put into this group mind situation in good and bad contexts. This is why everybody loves going to concerts
hmm
because you're all one, you're all in there. It's all a thing, right? I used to love going to midnight showings of movies. And I would tell people the reason why is because everybody in the room wants to be there,
hmm
sacrificed a bit to be there. It's a midnight show, but we're all on the same page, and you can feel that excitement when the movie's about to start. Yeah, the previews come on, everybody's like, "Yeah, baby!" Like it's a thing that we get into. It's a feeling, and I've been putting some ideas together about that maybe there is another kind of life there that we sort of create. It certainly feels like it, and it just takes a little nudge, a little voice, a little thing popping up that people will respond to, And you can move that group, you can move that mind, and that's
Yes.
kind of that
Okay.
phenomena. Does that
That's
make
what
sense?
you were talking about earlier about opportunists. We're seeing a lot of opportunists. So you have that hive surge that's only going to last for so long. People are going to
That's,
expend that energy.
that's right.
But in that wake, they're implementing as much as possible, which some
Bingo.
of it's going to have to be rolled back, but they're doing
Yep,
really good at shotgunning it everywhere. So we'll
that's right.
see
That's
how
right.
much
Robin
it takes.
DiAngelo, those books are selling out. Everybody's getting on board this thing. But you know what's going to happen. I mean, you know what's going to happen with that because these people are practically unreadable. I mean, they are so hard to get through their stuff, and the average American don't get it. So they're going to buy the books, but they'll just sit on a shelf. My wife has stacks of feminist literature, right? And she's great. She's amazing. She's wonderful. But she had some pretty different ideas than she has now that we've done, years of talking things
Mm.
through and working stuff out. And she used to think that there was a lot more oppression going on than there is.
Mm.
There is oppression. Again, there's fact-based reasons for some of this stuff. But is it as much as as it's somehow made out to be? No, of course not.
And how much are you reinforcing the oppression by believing in the oppression or allowing for a new form of oppression? I mean, you adulate oppression by being against oppression to a certain degree. Like you were saying with being content creators against this stuff, we can
Yep.
actually reinforce it if we're
Exactly.
not
So
really careful.
that's why I want to push critical thinking.
Yeah.
Again, this live stream I did a couple of days ago, just as a point, I didn't go on and start pushing back against Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to do that. That'd be suicide right now, right? I'm not. And besides, I don't even believe that. I think that there are good things. And I do think Black Lives Matter. I do think that there are injustices and inequities that need to be dealt with. So I'm not going to sit here and say it's all a cult. And somebody asked me that. They said, is BLM a cult? I said, no, it's not. I said there are some cultic aspects to it, though. And we need to pay attention to those, or we're going to end up going off the damn cliff. That's how I put it. So, because we need to be nuanced in how we talk about this stuff. If we become ourselves black and white thinkers and push us versus them on our audiences, we're doing them a disservice. It's harder and slower, though, because people are slower to respond to that kind of thing because they have to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And thinking's hard.
Yeah, it's not easy.
I don't say that in an insulting way. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
People don't want to think about stuff. It takes up too much energy. It's hard to do. Mm-hmm. So I try to push. This is why I identify. Oh yeah, I didn't tell you this, but
your identity.
my identity. I'm the critical thinker at large. I'm not the ex-psychologist at large. Yeah, I call myself a critical thinker at large because it's a joke, actually. But the way it happened was my original website, I lived in Minnesota. And when I first started speaking out against Scientology, I thought I was going to be in Minnesota for a good long time. So my website is mncriticalthinking.com because it was Minnesota Critical Thinker. I thought, okay, that's an identity. I'll grab that one, right? Nobody else in Minnesota is grabbing that. And I wanted to be known for critical thinking, not for being an ex-Scientologist. I knew I had more to say than just Scientology stuff. Mm-hmm. Even though for the first few years, that's all I talked about. But then I moved. I left Minnesota. I came to Denver, and I was like, well, shit, I can't keep calling myself the Minnesota Critical Thinker. So that's where Critical Thinker at Large came from. Mm-hmm. So that's why I call myself that. But I try to push critical thinking. I made a lot of videos about critical thinking, and I think that if anything, I used to feel like somehow we could eradicate irrational thinking.
Oh, really? That was how we were going to save the world?
Yeah, that's right. And I have thoroughly been disabused of those ideas now. But through education, not through, dejection. It's just a matter of changing your ideas. Now, like I said, I had to lose the certainty. I had to lose the whole I am saving the world thing. It took me a long time to get over that, man.
Yeah, no, you see that a lot. People going from one system of belief to another. Let's say the addict that becomes an evangelical Christian. The pitch of his behavior and the narrowness of his thought is the same. He just
Yep.
maybe believes in a system that will eventually allow him to become flexible over time, or not, but it'll save him from at least the drugs, right? But you see the people hopping from one fundamentalism to another, and it's really difficult to get out of that mindset.
According to one therapist who did a study on this that I was at a conference for, 80% recidivism, right? You jump from one cult to another. 80% chance that you're going to go from one cult to another, or go back into the cult you left, because they can't deal with that emotional uncertainty.
Okay.
It's hard. I tell you, it is the biggest struggle I have had, is going from a worldview where I had answers to important questions. Maybe they weren't the right answers, but I thought they were, and I was sure they were right. And that is such a wonderful place to be compared to the chaos of reality. I mean, the chaos of reality sucks. There's no answers. We really don't know what's up. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what happens when you die. No, we don't know where the universe came from. No, we don't actually know what's underneath an atom. No, we don't know if this is all a simulation or not. No, we don't know what an emotion is. No, we don't know what consciousness is. Well, motherfuck, what the fuck do you know? Like after a while, you're like, ugh.
Well, and what
I would escape to L. Ron Hubbard's answers. At least he's got some.
Yeah. It's to present a flexibility of thought is difficult to do because you have to get used to, I guess, not just not knowing. Like, I can't remain in a state of ignorance. I can't. I have to know, or I have to rather have a relationship with knowledge. So I can have a relationship with understanding and not go into nihilism, because I have to be alive. I kind of want to be, now that I'm used to it. For a while I didn't, but now that I'm used to it, and I want to think, so I have to think about something. And so I don't know what you mean by critical thought. I don't know what I mean by critical thought. My funny title is The Voice of Reason, but I'm very unreasonable in a lot of ways. But I'm trying to model a relationship. Like somebody asked me, do I not believe in facts? Because I said I was a postmodernist. They're like, well, do you not believe in truth? I'm like, well, let me reframe that. And this is cheesy, but a dancer doesn't believe in gravity. They see how much they can get away with, right? So I don't believe or disbelieve in truth. I want to see what works, what doesn't. What I'm playing here. I am being playful. And I think that critical thinking, I don't understand if it has a certain set of beliefs so much as I understand it as a way of engaging. I'm going to ask questions. Or what's your conception of critical thinking at large? Like, what is the stance? What is the...
It's open. It's being open to information. It is being willing to question anything and everything, that there are no sacred truths. There is no knowledge that cannot be questioned. There is no ultimate expression of truth that we're basically capable of, which I do know is a postmodern idea. However, I will immediately pull that back down to earth with, however, you and I have to get along. So we're going to have to agree on a few things. Now, whether those things are objectively true or not doesn't matter. As long as you and I are proceeding from the same platform of this is how things are, we can move forward in some fashion. And as we discover more about the world, those things that we agree are objectively true can become more and more real or testable or verifiable through scientific method. And scientific method is only useful because it's the only methodology we've come across or discovered or utilized in all of our history that establishes this baseline of what we're going to agree is true. It might be true, but we can agree because we can test it and verify it and go, well, we keep testing it and it seems to work this way. You agree with it, I agree with it. It doesn't take our subjective reality to agree it's true. You see it the same way I see it. You hear it the same way I hear it. So that's what we're going to call truth.
And it's testable, it's replicatable, And that's the weird thing about the way in which this particular movement has hopped across the world. Like, it's a very
Mm,
American story, but now
yeah.
it's overtaken Europe and Australia. And I haven't heard of any Asian countries. I really don't think that Asians will adopt this, but we'll see. I mean, writ large, and I don't mean that as a racist thing, but I just don't think that they're,
No, they're
uh,
culturally so different, is
yeah.
why. I love. Let me ask you what you think of this. This is my ultimate abductio ad absurd, reductio
Yeah.
ad absurdum of mankind, of the difference between the cultures, but between East and West, is West reduces down to me, not we,
Hmm. Hmm.
and Eastern cultures reduce down to we, not me.
Hmm.
You know, it's reductionist, but
Yeah.
their awareness of their place in their societies,
Yeah.
their awareness of the group survival being important and maybe more important than their individual survival,
Yeah.
is what makes them so radically different from us who put individual liberty and survival above that of the group. And
Hmm.
all of our movies and books and everything reinforce this. It's been a staple of Western thinking since, for centuries.
There's
So,
this on one level. There's this, and I'm just speaking cliches, but like a American Buddhist, there's always something a little off about them to me.
I,
Like
that's right.
I
That's
think
right.
that the principles of the Buddha are rooted in such a different operating system.
Yep.
And I don't know all the qualities of that operating system than the operating system of the West.
That's
And
right.
I think that there are things that are applicable to the East and West with regards to the knowledge that we make in the world. And science is one of those things that you see is implemented by the East as much as the West. And it's just the structures that they build around funding it, or what they do with it might be different. But like that's cross cultural for
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I'm talking about basically a different approach to life.
Yeah, but you can sense that there's a different orientation in their family structures, in their respect
Right.
for authority, and then you see how different ideas can hijack the East and hijack the West, and the ways in which, let's just say, communism goes through America, or socialism or whatever has gone through Europe, the European brain, and how it has gone through the Eastern mindset. Let's just say, not a physical sense, but just the operating systems implement it differently.
Yeah. 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 I think that's true. I think you have really vast differences. And I think that I had to have a friend of mine who actually lived in China, who came over for a weekend and we were hanging out, explain to me how things are in China. And it was like, oh, and that's where I twigged on all this. I was like, oh my God, now I get it. Because I
Mm,
just couldn't, you can't, how do all these billions of people, and how do they put up with all this crap that they have to put up with, and this clearly authoritarian dictatorship government that they all
yeah.
just kind of go along with, and
Mm,
all this stuff. But when you realize that as Americans, their view of the world is so radically different than ours at such fundamental levels, that it's amazing we can speak at all,
mm,
in some ways,
mhm, mhm.
and often many key ideas are lost in the translation because we're coming at understanding the words they're using from a whole different cultural context, and it's amazing when you get into the nuance of it and really try to understand it. Um and I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, except that orientation's different.
Yeah, yeah. I
And I,
wonder if it's
this is one
exacerbated.
we're more susceptible to cultic thinking on an individual level, though.
Could you
Than
expound on that?
Well, the Chinese won't even let Scientology into their country, for example, um, but they don't glom onto this individualistic goal of personal spiritual freedom and immortality the same way Westerners do. Westerners are, it's all about me.
Yeah,
I got,
salvation.
my salvation, right? They're more family centric in China. India too, as I understand it, right? So they're more like, what is this going to do for not just me, but for my whole family? They're thinking constantly in those kind of terms. If you knew in your culture that your parents were the people that you were going to be taking care of when you hit 40 or 50 and you planned your life accordingly, you'd have a very different life from the way we live our lives. You'd spend your money differently. Your relationship with them would be different. It would be radically different. And that's just one difference we have with, So that's what I meant by that.
Well, it seems to me there's already, there's certain lines of criticism within the anti-racist doctrine about the good white and the bad white. And it really does break down on, you have to prove that you're not just doing this for your own salvation. So they bring you in because it promises to save the world and save you from the stain of racism. But you have to very carefully navigate that and say, well, this isn't about, there's all these tricks that really do prey upon individuality and strip it by reinforcing it in an unhealthy way, it seems.
Well, they've literally rewrit biology in a way, because one of the things that I learned from Robert Sapolsky, and he was an evolutionary biologist who taught at Stanford. Great guy, really, really interesting, and probably
I've seen his lectures. Yeah.
Oh, you did? You see the ones on human behavioral biology?
Yeah, there's like 30 of them. They're like absolutely fascinating.
That long course that he did. Yeah. That changed my life. That really put in place a lot of the thinking that I then used in talking to neuroscientists and sociologists and biologists. When he talked about the different bins of knowledge and how there's different levels of truth, and how when you evaluate things, you're evaluating them according to these various buckets of knowledge. You can look at free will. The free will argument holds up at the neurological level. It falls apart at the sociological and psychological levels, though. So it's kind of like, well, is it true? Well, at this level it is. But if you look at it from a different perspective, it's not. It's a relative thing. Yeah. It is true. But then again, is it? So
and
it's
how
all...
are cults, or this cult in particular, rewriting biology? I mean, we've gone through it.
Example, they say that you are unworthy because your altruism is based on your own survival, on your own, you only help us because it helps you. And they use this as a cudgel of guilt and shame. Well, guess what, folks? Ain't nobody doing nothing if they don't think it somehow serves their best interests. That's how we survive. The very equation that Sapolsky taught me in that class, the most basic equation of life, is tit for tat. That's the most fundamental understanding life has. All the way down to the molecular level, practically, right? It's almost like the decision life made in order to be life was one day a rock got hit by another rock and said, fuck that, and hit the rock back, right? And suddenly we had life. You know what I mean? So the idea that you're ever going to do something for purely altruistic reasons is a total fantasy, and they have made it that that's a bug when it's a biological feature.
Yeah.
That's what I mean writing biology.
In another conversation, I either heard this or I think I heard this, that these systems are pathologizing normalcy and normalizing pathology.
Yes. That is beautiful. That is a beautiful little meme.
Couplet. Yeah, meme.
Couplet, that's right. That's exactly how to put it. And they villainize good people for trying to be good people. You're a villain no matter what role you wear. You're only as good an ally as I say you are. You only get to ally according to the ways I say you get to ally. I'm the black person in the room. You don't get to tell me about my experience. Well, fine, I won't tell you about your experience, but don't tell me about mine.
That's one of the fascinating things about the Evergreen situation, is that the kids uploaded everything they did to the internet because they already knew that they were right and everybody would agree with them. And the professors too, and this is the breakdown for me, is that the professors went and either lied or ignorantly claimed that the students did nothing wrong, that Brett Weinstein did something wrong for speaking to the outside about what was happening here by going on Tucker Carlson, by going on Rubin and Rogan, right? That was his sin that caused the backlash to their behavior. Their behavior was justified within the system, and it was just decontextualized as something bad. And they all got on that. It was another way that they doubled down because the teachers taught the students to do that. And to this day, they cannot own up to that. They cannot own up to that we did this. They're still championing the class of 2020 as like the...
It's blindness. It's just blind. That's the thing about where I was talking earlier about we see what we want to see or to see, not what's really there. Mm-hmm. I can't emphasize enough the power of that piece of information to our thinking, to our cognitive processes. It's beyond important. It's like seminal to how we think.
And in critical thinking is the learned behavior to put yourself into a position where you can safely be surprised, I suppose, to interact with, to gain that predictive capacity, to gain places or instances where you can suspend that predictive capacity in order to interact with new information or to glean new information out of old data stimulus.
It's the concentrated effort to overcome your impulse to make assumptions, to assume that what you think is true rather than what's really there, what you're really perceiving. It's a training because we don't organically think that way. Mm-hmm. You know, and the more we're learning, the more we are learning how we think, but we're pretty sure about this. You know, this is the rational thinking and all that, this whole thing that Socrates argued about and Aristotle and all these guys were struggling with this exact thing. But they didn't understand the neuroscience of it. They thought emotions were one thing and thoughts were another. No, they're same thing, you know. Mm-hmm. So they created these artificial constructs of emotions versus reason, you know, or the little demon inside of you or whatever. And that's carried forward for thousands of years and has been the basis of our philosophy. But now neuroscience and psychology are showing us, it's a little more complicated than that.
Do you think that we'll come up with a tentative kind of philosophy or conception of the human being? And I think that maybe it's going overboard to bring up this, but I think that insofar as the West has lost Christianity, we lost a uber narrative. We lost something that can tie the very intelligent to the very, the upper to the lower. There's no place where we can all agree on something. We have constantly propositions of the American dream, and now the American nightmare is the common mythos that we're living through. And right. Do you think that, have you come up with some formula? I guess critical thinking might be the formula for you of allowing everybody to have a common goal, a common narrative, a common nation, a common interest. Is there such a thing that can unite all these different people and these different tribes and these different...
I don't think so. I don't think that at the end of the day, there's anything that's going to unify us. You know, I thought about this actually quite a bit in terms of when I was giving up my saving the world concepts and habits. First, I had to realize that there is no such thing as saving the world. The world doesn't need saving. It's like George Carlin said, right? The world's not going anywhere. We are. Right? The world's planet doesn't need saving is actually how he put it, right? Remember that? Planet doesn't need saving. It's not going anywhere. No one in all of history has ever come up with an idea that united everybody. We can't all agree that we need to breathe. We can't all agree that the world's round. We can't all agree that, you know, death is the end. There's not one thing we all agree on. The closest person who comes up to getting the most agreement on this planet is Jesus Christ, and he probably wasn't even real. Probably never even existed. Just a fucking construct, you know, of a bunch of people through time that built this mythos, you know. And what are the common agreements there? That we will live beyond this life, that there is a God who created us and will allow us to, that created us in sin, and we are unworthy, and we must somehow strive to be better, and by doing so, we will earn our place in eternity, right? And we will gain personal immortality.
I
That's the
I thought
core,
you were.
right?
Well, I thought the core. I'm going to disagree. I thought the core of what Christ said was love your enemy as yourself. It was just teaching.
That was something he said, but that's not why people follow him. They follow him because he offers a message of personal immortality, a world beyond this world of suffering and pain and sin.
Okay.
There's a hope factor there, in other words, that life can be better, that it will be better if you believe strongly enough. Now, along with that comes this behavior code or ethics code of treat other people well. Don't piss in your own cornflakes and don't piss in theirs. Be nice to each other, turn the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. We all of us atheists argue so hard because the Old Testament says exactly the opposite of all that shit, and somehow they, cognitive dissonance their way through it. But at the end of the day, the thing that is driving people to believe in that, it comes down to that selfish altruism, right? I'll be good because I will be rewarded, right? That's really, at the end of the day, that's the basic sentiment of religion: is I will be good because I will be rewarded.
Are you free from needing a reason to be good? Have you achieved a purposelessness?
No, I think that we should be good to each other because it's how we make a good society that advances the interests of everybody in it. So I'm maybe that's an altruistic point of view, or maybe it's just a recognition that we're all part of something that we're trying to create together, and if we're going to do this to everybody's maximal benefit, then we need to get along, not fight each other. That's why I try to be good.
So, okay, so to go back to my question, how do we get everybody to get along if we let go of people not agreeing? Can we agree to get along?
Yes, we have to train people to agree to disagree, and we have to make it okay. This is where tolerance comes in. People think tolerance means agreement. It doesn't. It has nothing to do with agreement. I can tolerate your existence without agreeing with any part of it. We've got to get over ourselves as far as our own beliefs and ideas of things. And there's this difference, and this is where the cultic mindset comes in, is there's a difference between I have a set of beliefs of how the world works, and this is how I'm going to operate in the world and get along and navigate. There's a difference between that and I have this set of beliefs, and they're so good that you better get on board with them, because if you don't, you're the bad guy. That's the leap that we make that causes all the friction, that causes all the discomfort and the strife. And we got to get over ourselves and our own ego about our beliefs to before we're going to get to that world peace point. We need to lower the level of our own ego.
And avoid that which excites that ego or strengthens that ego, which is just as hard to do.
Because that's the stirring up of the discontent, and those are the bad guys, and all the reasons you're suffering in life is because of them. Like, there's also a responsibility factor here too, which might help temper that ego. It's not that you're always responsible for everything that happens to you, because you're not. That's that was a Scientology control thing, is it would be turned against you, right? But you're not. You're not responsible for everything that happens to you. But you have to also get over the idea that it's always somebody else's fault. It's not always somebody else's fault. Sometimes systems just break down. Sometimes shit happens. Sometimes lightning strikes. What are you going to do about that? Argue with God or some shit,
Yeah,
in a way.
It's that hubris of accountability.
Yeah.
It's really prideful, very egocentric. Right. Like, I can hold...
For agency. We're always looking for agency, right? Who did this? Who caused this? Who's responsible for this? Ultimately, it's God. That's the ultimate answer that we came up with. Stupid fucking answer, but makes sense to a primitive mind, right?
I think it's better than anything else.
It wasn't Sally, so it must have been God, right? Or it must have been the bird who represents the God, or you know, because the world's a confusing place, and we're simple creatures, and we want simple answers because we don't have to think too hard, you know. And this is the struggle. This is actually the struggle. We're only now starting to actually make inroads to understanding ourselves. One of the problems with all this is it's so new. You know, this is all post-Enlightenment stuff. Up until the Enlightenment, demons were real. Angels were real. You acted the way you did literally because another being occupied your body and made you do that. And people thought that was as real as this can of fucking Coke. Wow, right? So now we have a whole different way of thinking, and we're not quite used to it yet. Mm-hmm. And we're in that horrible transition period where we're like sitting here going, what do we do with this?
We really are like in a eternal teenaged society.
Yes. And I hope that we can survive long enough through this period of the strife and the war and everything that we seem to crave so much to evolve past this. You know, because evolutionarily wise, we're not evolving at all. We were the same biological creatures we were 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 years ago. We same basic brain mock-up, same basic body setup. So we haven't changed. It's you know, our capability of changing our environment has changed because our technology has changed, because our knowledge base has changed. And we need to catch up to those strides. You know, the humanities are still in their infancy. And they think they're so smart, and they're not. They don't have shit figured out yet. And this is again where we got to get over.
They used to know how to be beautiful, but they lost that along the way too. Now they just like produce and reinforce trash.
That's right. And that's the struggle of humanity. And it might well be our undoing. You know, I often consider that. I wonder, we're just another species on this planet. This planet loses, 1,000 species a year or some shit. We're just another one. You know, and we don't see our own self-interest in long-term goals. We're very short-sighted.
So should we end on the annihilation note?
I have the nihilistic view. No, let me give you the rest of these points because I want to just put them into your head so you'll think with them a little bit. Okay. And you can refer to my website anytime. The whole checklist is here. Okay, so the leadership dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. For example, members must get permission to date. And that's actually true in the Sea Org, by the way. You have to get permission to date somebody. Change jobs, marry, or leaders prescribe what types of clothes to wear, where to live, whether or not to have children, how to discipline children, and so forth. Most of these cults have very, very specific guidelines and rules for how to act and how to dress and stuff. You know, the Duggars. Have you ever seen that show, The Duggars, the 21 and Counting show? You know who I'm talking about? Big Family. You never heard of those? No. Okay, cool. No worries. They all dress in these long dresses, and the females can't be showing any arm, and it's ridiculous. The group is elitist, claiming a special exalted status for itself, its leaders and members. For example, the leader is considered the Messiah or a special being or an avatar, or the group or the leader is on a special mission to save humanity. Right? Real people who have realistic expectations and ideas don't ever think that what they're doing is saving the world. I mean, unless they're literally looking for a cure for a virus or something, you know. Like, those are the only people I'm gonna like give the credo. Okay, you're saving the world. Okay, good. You know. Okay, the group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. The leader is not accountable to any authorities. Unlike, for example, teachers, military commanders, or ministers, priests, monks, and rabbis of mainstream religious denominations, those guys have somebody else to answer to. L. Ron Hubbard didn't have to answer to anybody, right? What's her name? The leaders of Black Lives Matter, the leaders, these academics who write these books and stuff, they don't feel like they have anybody to answer to. They're the ones who are issuing the dogma. They know best, and everybody else just better get on board. Mm-hmm. It's that attitude, The leader is not, okay, so the leader's not accountable. The group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means it deems necessary, right? And justifies the means. This may result in members participating in behaviors or activities that they would have considered reprehensible or unethical before joining the group. Mm-hmm. As a Scientologist, for example, I was able to rationalize credit card fraud. I was able to rationalize disconnecting forcefully mothers from their daughters, sons from their fathers. I was able to rationalize physical abuse, psychological blackmail. Just as a regular course of events. And I never would have accepted that kind of crap on day one. Never, right? Gradually lead you into it and get you to a place where, like that black girl who was screaming at the top of her lungs in the middle of the hallway, fuck Brett Weinstein, fuck. Do you think the day she arrived at that college, she ever imagined she'd be doing that? I don't. Because who gets steeped in this shit in 8th grade, right? In high school, not
more and now, more people.
Yeah, nowadays maybe it's starting, but it had to start somewhere. Okay, the leadership includes. Oh no, the leadership induces feelings of shame or guilt in order to influence and control its members. This is crucial. This is a real important part of cultic movements, and this kind of thing. The shame, blame, guilt thing is a major control mechanism.
How do you guard yourself from shame and blame? I mean,
you have to keep your head on straight. You can't because the appeal to emotion is what's strongest there. Right. Cults specialize in a couple different logical fallacies. Appeal to emotion is one of the strongest. Appeal to authority is another one. Those are really, really strong logical fallacies in these groups. And they purposefully are ramping you up. They want that emotion. This goes all the way down to MLMs. Multi-level marketing companies. You ever seen the group meetings these guys get into? Amway and those guys?
I think so.
Forums, they have regular meetings. The MLM guys have regular meetings and conferences, and they look like religious revivals. These are businesses, and they look just like religious revivals. In fact, the CEO of one of the MLMs was literally on stage compared to Jesus Christ. It's all about the emotional thing, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's how they induce the shame and the guilt, and they lay it on real thick. And of course, that's where all the labels come in. Oh, you're a disagreeable label.
Yeah.
The antithesis of what you want to be. Yeah. Alt-right, racist, sexist, misogynist, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. What these guys don't account for in human psychology, what they don't seem to understand about human psychology is that all of those tools are short-term tools. They only last for a certain period of time. Eventually, people wake up to it. Eventually, people get sick and fucking tired of being called something that they know they're not. And it eventually starts rubbing them the wrong way. They always overplay their hand. Even Stalin did.
Stalin.
Even Stalin, right? I mean, even Russia, because Stalin led to Khrushchev, led to the other guys. But they eventually communism fell, and it didn't even last 100 years. And they were absolutely positive. They were building, structures that were going to last through the ages and stuff, right? Everybody's sure they got the thing that's just going to go. And they don't understand that people are only going to live under the actual yoke of oppression, which they become. They're only going to live for that shit for so long. At most 3 or 4 generations. Because by the time you're down 4 or 5 generations into this shit, these people were never true believers. The first generation, the second generation, even the third generation were the true believers. They were the ones who believed in the vision of the Soviet Republic and the revolution and all that. This is why communes always break down. Why in Israel you never have a commune last longer than the first generation. Because the second generation grows up in the shit and goes, this is fucking bullshit. I want a radio, man. I want to listen to some music. I want to go see a movie. And the true believers were their parents, and their parents were like, no, that's our society. That's bad. But the kids never bought into that shit, So it always cycles out. Okay, a couple more and then we'll be done. Subservience to the leader or group requires members to cut ties with family and friends.
Yes. Yeah.
And radically alter the personal goals and activities they had before joining the group. Always
There's a lot of cutting of ties right now. Not just firings, but like young people on Facebook, on Instagram, policing each other for not posting the correct thing.
Yep, that's right. Scientologists do the same things. They actually have Facebook police. Literally.
Why not?
Yeah. They monitor, they watch, they control. It's all about control. And all you got to do to start breaking free of it, actually, this might serve your purposes too. All you got to do is say no once and watch what happens. Just say it once.
What do you think happens?
When they're trying to control you, when they're trying to say, no, you can't post that. No, you can't say that. No, you can't do that. Say no and see what happens. No, I think I do want to post that. And you will see your allies, your best friends, the people you thought had your back under thick and thin, turn on you like that. And they will ostracize you. And this is the moment of wake up. And this is probably the answer you're looking for as far as waking people up. The moment of wake up is always a personal betrayal of some kind. The group has to somehow betray its values against that member who thought he was being the most loyal, subservient, Winston Smith member of the group. And he could, he was following all the rules. She was saying all the mantras. They were doing all the right things. And suddenly the group turns on them because of one little thing that they got off or got wrong. So if you can purposefully get somebody to cast the first stone, to say the no, they'll experience it for themselves. And that will convince them faster than any number of words you'll tell them. Try disagreeing with your group and see what happens. just plant that earworm, right? Try disagreeing and see what happens. Don't even say you have to leave. Just say, try disagreeing. Okay, the group is preoccupied with bringing in new members. The group is preoccupied with making money. Members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. You don't get to have a life outside the group, right? If you're not dedicated enough, you're not loyal enough, you're not active enough, what are you doing? Prove it. Let's, what are you up to? They guilt you and shame you into it. And finally, 2 things. Members are encouraged or required to live and or socialize only with other group members. Probably about a year into Scientology, you find out that you have no other non-Scientology friends. You don't know how it happened. It just happened. And the most loyal members, the true believers, feel that there can be no life outside the context of the group. They believe there is no other way to be and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. And that's the last one. And that all comes out of a book called Take Back Your Life, Recovering from Cults and Abusive Relationships.
By you?
No, by Anya Lalich.
Well, it's
my heroes.
So you Well, first of all, thanks for bringing your knowledge to this, because I've seen a lot of parallels within the Evergreen State College, and that's what I was thinking at the very beginning of me critiquing it when I was still there, and I wrote a post on the forums like, okay, let's just go through how cults behave, and let's go through how our professors and students are behaving here. Look at what you guys are doing.
Very apt comparison.
Yeah.
Very. All of what I was on those videos was straight up cult indoctrination.
Yeah. And I guess the question that we're going to see is, can a cultic way of thinking expand and claim an entire society? Can it operate on the level of every institution? And you're agreeing that it can.
America, fuck yeah.
Okay, so that's not hopeful. Again, we're going into the annihilation mode.
Okay, well, let me pull it back a little bit then, because we're in a nation of what, 200 million?
330?
330 now? 330 million people? You're never going to get 330 million people on the same page on anything. Okay, so it's all flavors. It's all spectrums. This is really important to understand about this stuff, spectrums and everything, right? What we used to, Hubbard even had this in Scientology a little bit. He called them gradient scales, but it's really spectrums. And, there are no black and white. That doesn't exist in the real world. It's always shades of gray. Even the most ardent, fanatical supporter of something will have, little tiny bells and whistles and doubts and things going on in their head sometimes. So there's always room. There's always a door, that you could open. It might take a little while to make the door visible to the person if they're really caught up in the euphoria of it all. And that's another key part. Actually, we didn't talk about this at all, and it's not in the checklist, but euphoria, awe, fervor are all aspects of what an evolutionary biologist friend of mine puts it in terms of love. He says these all are spectrums of love that we feel, right? We have kinship bonds, as Sapolsky talked about. And there's a reason why cults use familial terms to discuss their followers, right? The priest, the father, and his children, his flock. These
my
are
friends,
familial.
my allies.
That's right. All these terms are chosen very carefully on purpose. Because that brings in the whole kinship bonds thing. We can look at the hate and the revile and the black versus white thinking and that kind of stuff, and those are all characteristics of this. But it's all built on a foundation of fervor, and that fervor comes from love. It comes from a place of compassion. That's why people join these groups. No one ever thinks they are joining a cult. Ever. They always believe they're hooking up with a social movement or a group that is somehow, or a relationship with a narcissist. They're joining something that is going to be a really amazingly popular and positive experience. And often they're surprised at how ugly things can get and how fast they can get that way, because they didn't see it coming. But usually the gradual step-by-step process of indoctrination makes that transformation invisible to the person, and they do things here that they wouldn't even recognize themselves anymore if they were seeing it from their day one perspective.
I think that can happen on an institutional level too, and this is really rudimentary metaphor, but the way in which the New York Times has slowly turned from we're going to have. I remember Sarah Jeong came on, and it came to light that they hired this editorial woman who has reams and reams of anti-white posts, just anti-white, and they all covered for her, and they all they're like, well, that was parody. She didn't really feel that way, and now all of that generation, the millennials, I don't know what generation they are, but now they've taken over and are telling all the old leadership what to do, what to say, what not to say. And I think that the institution itself has kind of gone into a cultic stupor in a way of being we're gonna choose people who are going to represent our values of inclusivity and diversity and really criticizing those hard right backward people or what I don't know whatever. But then all of a sudden they get turned. It devours them from the inside out. The institution itself acts as a unit of somebody being kind of. It doesn't become a cult, but it is.
Yeah, it's like
in a way. Yeah,
it's
like the
cancer.
Yeah.
Because it's an introduction of a new generation. I mean, this is also the struggle of the ages with generations and the generational conflicts, because the new values always assume the old, and that's what we call progress, and or lack of progress if the ideas are bad. And in this case, the ideas are bad. They're just wrong-headed ideas. They're not based in fact. They're faith-based ideas that are non-falsifiable, and they're stupid. You know, you're always a racist. You'll always be a racist. Fuck you. I mean, what the fuck is that? That's not even a falsifiable claim. Yeah. It's a faith-based statement.
Yeah.
And they consider it a scientific truth. And that's where they've gone completely fucking nuts. Is they have no concept of what science even means anymore. And that's where Lindsay goes on about, critical theory and how it's gone off the rails and taking everything over the cliff. And that's how it's doing it. So it becomes so really what we have is a natural phenomenon of sociological evolution of the new replacing the old. And that's a good thing. That's how it's supposed to be. But when the new is built on corrupt principles of of ridiculousness, then you get cultic phenomenon. That's when people have to double down because they can't back up the ideas with intellectually honest arguments. And they kind of know that. But it feels so right. Mm-hmm. Feels so righteous, And man, I've been filled with that spirit. It's powerful. It's way more powerful than intellectual certainty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I carefully regulate my righteous outrage. Every once in a while, I'll allow myself to express outrage, but because I know that it doesn't go or end anything. It makes us all feel good or bad, depending on what side of the ire you are on. But beyond that, it hasn't changed anybody.
That's right. And when you base a whole philosophy on it, like they did with communism, like they're doing now with critical race theory or critical theories, because it's the same shit in the gender world too. I mean, these guys are just going fucking nuts with this stuff. It's short-lived. We don't see it. We're not going to see it. We're kind of fucked because we're in the middle of it right now, and it's going to take a while for this stuff to calm the hell down. Us pushing back against it is a good thing because we contribute to that. We push back against the inertia, and we're the counter force to the force. So we're not just relying on. We can sit back and we can rely on its inertial dampening to eventually peter out. People are going to die. Ideas are going to get revised. People are going to wake up to the stupidity they're involved in. And, because at the end of the day, life has certain rules that it follows. And if we're going to survive, those rules are going to have to be followed in some fashion. But these things are like cancers, and they grow and spread and destroy organs and make trouble until you excise them, and eventually we do. We might not be around to see that. But the fact that we're pushing back against it is itself a positive part of taking these things down. So I know I talk nihilistically sometimes, but when it comes down to what you and me are doing, what we're doing is necessary and important.
On a long enough timeline, everybody's on the right side of history.
Exactly. That's right.
Just depends on what part of history exhumes you to justify its ends.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So at the end of the day, all you can really do, and this is where I kind of really drew the reins in on the saving the world thing, is I realized that the quality of my life is determined by what I do with it, not by the forces going on around me. And I need to take responsibility for that. That's what I can be responsible for.
Yeah. A form of stoicism,
I guess.
In a way.
Yeah, I think so. And also, I would call it practicalism. I don't know if stoicism,
practicality.
But let's just be real. Like how much can I affect in my life? I can speak to other people. I can influence their ways of thinking to whatever degree they're willing to listen to me. And I can try to do good, and be kind. I liked, do you know Patton Oswalt, right? The comedian?
I don't think so. I would.
Patton Oswalt? You'd probably know him if you saw him. Look him up. He's a comedian. He's a really funny guy. His wife died a few years ago. He's remarried. And it was a big loss for him and his daughter. And he did a stand-up where he actually talked about it. And it's on Netflix. And he's got a new one out right now, but it was the last one he did. I forgot what it was called. But he said in the thing, he talked about his ex-wife. And he said one of the things that she said that really brought a lot of perspective to his life. And the second I heard it, I was like, that's it. That's my mantra for life right there. It's chaos. Be kind. Because that's life. Life is chaos. All the structures and things we do, they're artificial. We're just trying to frame our place in life. So at the end of the day, what can you do that actually is good? Be kind. And I like that so much I had it tattooed on myself. So I'm not nihilistic. I'm really not. I try to be real though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put things in perspective. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I guess we're going to do another one of these where you pick my brain.
Yes. I would very much like to. Have we been recording this?
Have we not?
I haven't been.
I have. Was that okay? I thought we were...
Oh, no, it's totally fine with me. Good. I was just chatting because I didn't know what this was going to be. I honestly, when I first get to know somebody, I don't know where it's going to go, right? I like your videos, but I hadn't interacted with you yet. So I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with it. I just place that out or whatever, all my little maunderings here. But no, I'm totally fine with you posting this.
No, I think this is very, very useful, very timely, very important for my channel as a whole. As I go through and try to cover responses to this while critiquing it and trying to allow the people who are going so strong with it to not necessarily salvage their reputation, but salvage the virtues that they think they're fighting for. If they can salvage that process of equity from a infinite backlash of race war and tribalism that they are, I don't know how they're not aware of this, but that they are promoting and pushing, then at least they'll have something to cling to when.
Well, at the end of the day, the sad truth about the people who push these power dynamics and stuff is that they're trying to put themselves into the position of power that they are fighting against right now. It's the communist revolution playbook, literally step by step by step, which I'm absolutely positive these folks, the academics on this side, are fully informed of. Yeah. It's just weird how they don't think through the consequences of it. I endlessly marvel at the inability of narcissists to understand that, and their followers who adopt their personality characteristics this way, to understand that they are not the historical exception to the rule of what has happened to every single narcissist in history.
Yeah. It's almost like these ideas create and or attract narcissists. And that might be going down that hazy road of personality traits, but it either informs or creates, or it either attracts or creates tyrants.
Yes, that's right. And that's all we're really talking about, because narcissist itself has become so overused. It's pretty watered down now. It's a difficult concept to understand. And at the end of the day, there's no gene, there's no neuroset, there's no organ we're pointing to that says, there's the narcissism trait, right? Yeah. It's how people act. Yeah. So that's how we kind of are looking at it right now. And yes, tyranny, oppression, dictatorships, authoritarianism. These are all words to describe the phenomena of people taking advantage of other people through deceptive means. And there's a whole lot of deception going on right now in critical race theory. And that's why we need to fight back against it.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.